Hi, everyone. Welcome to Read It Again's Bookstore online author series. Today, we're talking to Susan Wiggs. Hi, Susan.
Hello.
Thank you for coming and chatting with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You're like the first real people I've talked to all day. I've been writing.
I'm thrilled. Let me just give everyone that's tuning in a little blurb about you and your books. So, Susan Wiggs is the author of more than 50 novels, including the Lakeshore Chronicles, which I absolutely love, and also the bestseller of Family Tree. Your books have been translated into more than 24 languages, and you live with your husband on an island in Washington State's Puget Sound. So, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Really, it is. I love that you're broadcasting from a bookstore. It's so cool.
Yep, I'm all set up in the bookstore. You can't really see all the way around, but I'm surrounded by books, new, used, that sort of thing. So today we're going to talk, and let me see if I can get this right. Your book is called The Lost and Found Bookshop. And of course, I loved it because I'm a bookseller anyway. So this was wonderful to read. So I have a bunch of questions specifically about the book, but maybe some people don't know that you did write historical romance and then moved to general fiction. So talk a little bit about that and how you changed over to general and that sort of thing.
Well, one thing that I shock myself every time I think of it is that I published my first book in 1987. And so it's no wonder that I've sort of moved around in the last 30-something years. I started out writing historical romances, number one, because I loved to read them. I was in graduate school. I was, always looking for escape and just a lifelong reader. And so I was reading the big, bodice ripping classic historical romances. And so I started out writing those, and I did well. I loved writing them. I still love writing them, but I don't have time with my current contract. But I started out in that, and then I was led astray by some lovely contemporary stories that just kind of took me over, and I wandered away towards that, and then those sort of found a readership that was just really keen for those. And so I decided to work on mainstream general fiction in a series, like you mentioned, the Lakeshore Chronicles series, and a very limited two-book series, the Bella Vista Chronicles. There's a historical series called the Calhoun Chronicles, and they're sort of loosely related historicals. And so, and I have a lot of single title novels that I've been, that have also kind of owned me through the years. And so I think it keeps me fresh. It keeps my readers entertained, and so I've definitely been a switch hitter through the years. And it's been, I would like to say, it's nothing but fun, but a writer's journey has a lot of curves in the road, and so maybe we can talk about that today. Thank you again for having me. Your bookstore looks amazing. I wish I was there.
Thank you. Well, on your next, when you're allowed to start traveling, we would love to host you.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, okay. You heard it here first. I'm coming. So
all right. And we'll hold you to that.
Yeah.
So let's get into the book. As you can see, I have all my fabulous purple tabs here. So tell us about the book and what prompted you to write it.
What prompted me to write it was a fantasy that I have, a personal fantasy that I have about owning a bookstore. And many writers that I know, we fantasize because we love books. I came up through my entire life with a love of books, and probably my second favorite thing about books is sharing them with others. And so being a bookseller was always just a very fond fantasy of mine. And not only that, I also had this whole bookseller lifestyle fantasy. and you're probably going to laugh at me, but I picture being a woman surrounded by books. I live in this beautiful vintage building in old San Francisco, and I kind of created this whole big fantasy around it. And I always create a job for my protagonist that's a job that I would love to have. So that's why they're artists and photographers and, people with really cool, sexy jobs that don't involve, sitting and scribbling all day. So that was the genesis. But being a Susan Wiggs book, it had to have a character at a very big crossroads in her life with a very big problem, either one that was handed to her or one she created on her own. And this one, Natalie, my bookseller in the Lost and Found Bookshop, she is at a crossroads. She has created this very calm, predictable life that is nothing like her chaotic childhood growing up, above a bookstore. And suddenly, through a horrible, tragic event, she finds herself in charge of not only running this vintage bookstore in old San Francisco, but also in charge of looking after her aging grandfather, who was the father figure in her life. And so for me, it's a really tender book, especially compared to my previous book, The Oysterville Sewing Circle. It was kind of an angry book. It was about domestic violence survivors and workplace abuse and things like that. Oh yeah, you got there with a red spool, and it's in paperback too. There you go. Yeah. So that was my book that came out last year. This one is a lot more personal and tender. My mother is 89 and she lives with us, and she has dementia. And so I've included some inspiration from her with her permission. I didn't have to gaslight her too much, just to kind of pick her brain. Or as she says, you can pick what's left of my brain. But the main story is a character that I really, really care about, who gets into this situation. And I'm always a sucker for that character who has something drop in her lap and she has to solve it. So that's where we're at with Natalie.
Yeah, she had quite a few struggles, but and we'll talk about the end. Just wanted to make a quick comment that if people who are watching want to ask Susan a question or us a question, please go ahead and post, and Susan will respond if she sees it, and we can answer your questions as best as we can from there. So if there was one theme from this book that you wanted us as your readers to take away, what would it be?
I think that what I would love for readers to take away is a takeaway that I wish that I had embraced at a younger age. And that is, don't live in your essence. Don't live in your identity, but live in your essence. And by that, I mean, if you can picture Natalie at the beginning, she's very buttoned down. She has a corporate job. And she's organized her life in a very specific way. And that is her identity. That's who she thinks how she needs to present herself to the world. And so that's one thing that people tend to do because it's comfortable. We live in our identity. What I would hope that the takeaway is live in your essence, even if it feels vulnerable and feels dangerous to go there. And I think you can kind of see it if you, to those of you who are reading the book, pay attention to what Natalie wears in certain key scenes in the book, because there's a progression in her outfits as well. And I remember when I was writing it, I'm not much of a fashionista, and I'm not good at sketching, but I would scribble like a sketch of what she had on at certain key scenes in the book to kind of remind me that she's making a journey from trying to live in her identity to living in her essence when she's really, really herself and comfortable in her own skin.
Yeah, that's really nice. So throughout the book are various quotes from books and references to books. I have a whole page, and that's what some of my purple markings are. How did you possibly decide these certain sentences of these fabulous books? And they're all over the range. There's sci-fi, there's kids, there's, Are they your favorites?
They are.
Okay.
That was one of the great pleasures, and also, a challenge for me to try to winnow down the most important words from the most important books in my life. Because, as you know, as a reader, you have books that become part of your blood and bone, depending on where you were in your life when you read it, and how it landed with you.
Mm-hmm.
Like the very first one is from Tuck Everlasting, which is one of the all-time great children's books. And I met the author, Natalie Babbitt, when I was a school teacher. In the early 80s, she came to my classroom and she talked. And that book was so important to me as a reader, as a teacher, as a mom, and then as a writer, that it was something that I really just embraced. And so it was such a pleasure to be able to share that, very important sentiment at the beginning of the book. You don't have to live forever. You just have to live. And it kind of encompassed, a major theme in the book. So, yeah. So my books all look like your book, with the purple tabs or the colored tabs in them. And, they're all highlighted in places, and I have my keepers. And I think in Natalie's bookstore, she calls it the wow shelf, words of wisdom. Mm-hmm. And so her special book she would display there for her clients that come in, her customers. And so it was great. And in fact, my publicist was so happy with all of the books that are cited in the book, because if you're writing a story about a bookseller, people come to her shop, they say, what should I read? And she says this or that. And so that was super fun. I felt like I actually had a grown-up job. And so on my website, susanwiggs.com, if you click the Lost and Found Bookshop, there's a page, there's a reading guide there. And one of the pages of the reading guide lists all the books that I cite in the book. Yes. Yeah, give you a shopping list.
Yeah, I printed it out, and it's all over the place. I have to say my favorite was the comment of Charlotte's Web.
Oh, I know.
That was
White. I can, of course I never knew him, but he was not only a great author, but a wonderful writing teacher. And most writers know his writing lessons from Techniques of the Selling, what's it called? The Elements of Style by A.B. White. And some things in writing depend on your talent and your inspiration and your voice and things like that. But a lot depends on your mastery of craft. And that's what I learned from him, is that, a lot of us are good writers. We can, and we have good ideas and everything, but to be a master of your craft puts you in control. And I credit that. That's one reason that I've, managed to be a published author for the last 30 something years, is that the one thing you can control, when even in the middle of a pandemic, is your craft. Mm-hmm. So that's, I was proud to be able to include Charlotte's Web. And when I was in graduate school, I actually wrote a whole paper about the first 88 words of Charlotte's Web. So,
well, and speaking of words, I'm going to turn to page 66 here, and bear with me. And Natalie is talking to her mom, and she says, and I'm sorry, I'm looking down. Yes. The first sentence on page 72 dictates your plan for the next day, or your deepest secret. So then, of course, I have to go to 72. And it says, for the time being, in honor of her mother's life's work, they would carry on.
Yes.
Why did you put that?
Okay, well, you know what? I do have kind of a funny story about that. I have a book that was published a couple of years ago called Map of the Heart.
Yes.
And the whole time I was writing, it's do I have any copies? Yeah, they come and they go from here. Map of the Heart. Oh, check it out. Here's Map of the Heart in Swedish. I can see my author copies. So So that one came out a couple of years ago. But as I was writing it, I I had a working title that I really liked. I was very fond of the title that I thought was going to be the title of the book. It was Acts of Light, because the main character in that one is a photographer, and there are scenes of her in this, old school dark room. And I thought Acts of Light, and it started with an Emily Dickinson quote that also cited that. And so in my mind, that was always the title of the book. And I turned the book in, and there were many discussions with the publisher, and ultimately they said, no, Acts of Light is not going to work for you. It's not going to work for this book. And so we're going to call it something else. And I think they came up with Map of the Heart, which is, it's fine. But, I was always fond of that book. And so when I had a chance to feature a book in the Lost and Found Bookshop, I called it Acts of Light. And so that book actually does exist, just not with that title. And that's from that book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's where that one came from. Most of the other books that I cite in the Lost and Found Bookshop are real books, and many of them by good friends of mine and writers I admire. And so that was another pleasure of doing this book.
Let's talk a little bit about Dorothy. I absolutely love Dorothy. And I mean, she was clearly wise beyond her years, said things, straight from the heart. Why did you choose a younger person, given that she actually comes across as being a lot older and a lot wiser than some adults these days?
Well, I'm a grandmother of one, okay. And her name is Clara. She's 6. And when I was raising my daughter, I was a busy mom. And I think that when you're busy as a mom, a working mom especially, you miss the deep, incredible wisdom of children. And you're focused on, how are we going to get you to the next grade? What are you going to be when you grow up? And the thing to remember is a kid is somebody right now. Right. And they're really, really interesting and really smart. And so Clara, my granddaughter, was kind of the inspiration for Dorothy. I made her a little bit older so that she could have more of a range. And but sometimes it's just startling what a kid can impart. And the other thing, and this goes back to my talk about writing craft, the E.B. White's advice to learn your craft is that I try to put things in my book that are irresistible and memorable. And probably one of the most irresistible and memorable relationships in the book is the one between Dorothy, the little girl, and Grandy, the old man. Because who doesn't love a little girl and an old man?
Yeah, I really liked that when she came around and would always ask where he was, or if in the end, when he really kind of couldn't get up and around as much, she'd knock on his door and, come in, and how I always got the perception that it brightened his day just to have her there.
Yeah. And you see it when you see little ones and elders around. Kids are not judgmental. I mean, they probably get that way at some point, but there are certain really charming ages, and I wish we could keep them there forever, where they have no judgment. If this guy, gets lost on the way to the bathroom, a kid's going to go, oh, well, it's right over here. Let me show you, and not worry about it and not stress and say, well, we got to change your meds and we got to take you to the doctor and we got to write it down, And so I really wanted to play with this very enjoyable and memorable relationship in the book. And plus she has a super hot dad.
Claire, as I'm reading, I'm visualizing, okay, who could play that person, or who would Dorothy be, or something like that. So
I know, yeah, a carpenter musician with a ponytail from Georgia named Peach. In the military, everybody gets a nickname, and he was Peach because he was from the military, and and from Georgia. So and in fact, I don't know if you noticed, but gosh, now I'm forgetting the name of his first guitar teacher. Was the guy from, oh God, now I've lost it. I'm so focused on my next book that I've lost it, but it was a real guy from Georgia, REM. Yeah. He's a guitar player from REM, and he's from right outside of Atlanta, I think. Yeah. Marietta, maybe.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah. So there's a very tiny Georgia connection, but with probably one of my favorite characters in the book. I tried to give Natalie two love interests, but
Well, you kind of did, and
yeah,
that's what I want to talk about is Trevor Dashwood. You know,
very Jane Austen.
I didn't know if Natalie should go with Trevor or go with Peach, but she kept, kind of going towards Peach with all of his, six-pack abs and that sort of thing. But was he based entirely fictional, or did you have a present author in mind as you're talking about him?
Here's another bookstore connection. An author friend of mine, her name's Suzanne Selfers, and she writes young adult books and children's books. Here's one of her books. It's called Smells Like Pirates. It's about a dog and it's a very good kids adventure. Anyway, Suzanne and I were boating together up in northern Canada last summer, and she was about to buy a bookstore in our area. She was about to buy Liberty Bay Books in Paulsbo, Washington. And she was, with much trepidation, but she also wanted to continue to write. And so I was just brainstorming the Lost and Found Bookshop, and I said, well, I want a children's book author, but I need to know what he writes and what he would be like, and, give him this very complicated and kind of sad, tragic backstory. Mm-hmm. And together, Suzanne and I talked about it, and she's, much more familiar with the children's book world. And so I would run ideas by her. And I said, well, what about an author who wrote the flip side books? Meaning, and back when I was a teacher, there were books that you could flip. They weren't called flip side books, but you could read it one way and flip it and read it the other way. And it was not the same story, but from a different perspective. And so I kind of did a riff on that for Trevor's best-selling books, where it would be like dog and cat. One side of the book is the whole story from the cat's perspective, and then you flip the book over and it's the same story only from the dog's perspective. Or, big brother, little brother. I would pick diametric opposites, and those were his books. And those are fictional because, obviously I didn't have time to write them, but I always thought that would be fun, to read a whole story from one character, because every character in a book thinks they're the star of the book, right? They can't all be, but they all have to think they are.
So there is a word in the book that I marked, and you say it's bibliotherapy, and you talk about how books help. When you wrote that,
everything,
right? Do you agree with that? And does it help you?
Absolutely. I think another thing that I believe, and I like to tell people, is you're never alone when you're reading a book. Because if you think about the most lonely, troubling times in your life, and life is long and life is complicated, and we all have those times. For me, I run for solace for a book, and it might be a book that I know, and I know I'm going to find comfort and wisdom in the pages, or escape and humor, or danger, and, anything. And so I've always, books have always been my friend. I'm such a classic middle child, that neglected one in the middle with all, the big busy family all around. And so I've always believed that. And I don't know about you, but I think this is probably true of any avid reader. When you read a book that really, really resonates, you usually remember where you were in your life and what you were doing, and where, and you sort of bond with the book based on that. And so that's something that I tried to play up in the story.
So let's talk a little bit about the research that you did for this bookstore, because your descriptions are very vivid. Did you visit bookstores? What kind of research did you do? And how long did it take to actually kind of pull it all together?
I usually take a year to write a book start to finish, and that includes the research as well. And so this book was a particular pleasure to research. Some books, not so much. You've got to kind of dig for facts and things like that, and not very interesting places. But in this case, I got to create my fantasy bookstore from all of my favorite bookstores that I've been to, starting with Shakespeare and Company, which is on the left bank of the Seine River in Paris. Because when I was a youngster, we lived there, and I went to school there as a schoolgirl, and that was my refuge. And it's still there, and it's still kind of the same. I guess they've got a website now. And so the old pokey parts of the bookstore in my book are based on that. They're based on every really cool little community bookstore that I've gone into, where the shelves have like, thank you for all your face outs on your shelf at your store, and everything on display. And I visited several in person. I want to give a shout out to Story and Song, which is on Amelia Island, Florida, not too far from you, I guess. That one, she took the time to give me a little walkabout in her store. My local indie bookstores, Eagle Harbor Book Company, Liberty Bay Books, which belongs to my friend Suzanne now. So, and I always seem to, whenever I travel, I go to a new town or a new city or something like that, I almost always find myself like drawn to a bookstore. And so all the little bits and pieces, all my favorite things, the tables, the furniture, the coffee bar, all of those sort of went into my creation of my fantasy bookstore.
And when I was reading it, I have, a very vivid of what, and the picture of what your bookstore would look like. I thought you did a great job depicting, walking in, and, the wow shelf that Natalie used, and the staff picks and that sort of thing. I just have a very vivid picture of what that would be. And I liked that to kind of take place as I'm reading the book.
I love world building. And Kim on the sidebar here asked if I'm a pantser or a plotter. And I love that question, because somebody who writes by the seat of her pants doesn't really plan the book ahead. They come up with these big concepts and ideas and characters and things, but they don't necessarily map out the book. And a plotter is somebody who, carefully lines up our index cards and so I kind of I do both. I always try to plot and think my book through from beginning to end. But what happens in the writing of a book, especially if the book is going well, is it kind of takes on a life of its own. And it wants to go its own way, even if you're trying to put it in a box. Like one of the, in fact, in my original plot for the book, she ended up with the other love interest. I'm not going to say which one she ends up with. There are two. Yeah. And so in the original, and the one that I pitched to my publisher, I said, the synopsis, she ended up with one love interest. And as the book unfolded, she changed her mind. She changed my mind. She changed everybody's mind. And so I have to try to stay open to that, because I think when a character runs away with a story, it's a good thing. It means that the book has energy and verve, and it's going to hopefully, catch the reader.
So how long does it usually take for you to write a book from start to finish? When you start your research?
Okay, this is what my books look like. I know, it's horrible, right?
Wow.
I take a year, and I'm not writing the whole time. I'm researching, I'm traveling. Anyway, and since I was probably, 12 years old, I've written in these same kind of notebooks with the same kind of pen. So it's kind of a habit. And I have tried to compose my draft on screen, but I think that I'm a commitment phobe when I'm on the screen, and I'll write a little something and then, judge it not worthy and cross it out, delete. And so no delete key on here, and also no way to lose your work except if you drop it, or, the dog takes a bite out of it.
You spill coffee all over it.
Yeah. Well, back before, we had cameras on our phones, if I didn't get my book typed up, there was only that one copy. And so I would put it in the freezer when I left, because I figured if the house burned down, the whatever's in the freezer would be the last thing to go. And so
the freezer would still be standing.
yeah, God forbid that I should actually, get a fireproof safe or something like that. But I don't have to do it anymore, because if I've written a lot, but I haven't rendered it, in type on my computer yet, I can just take a picture, and that's my it wouldn't be fun, but I could manage, if I had a picture of every page.
So what's your typical writing day? Do you write every day? Do you take a break?
Yeah, writing, as much as it is a pleasure, some days it's like passing a kidney stone. It just, the words won't come. And so I try to do what I call the heavy lifting first thing in the morning, right after coffee and exercise. It used to be I would go to a fitness class, but now with the pandemic, I go to my patio and my yoga mat and my morning radio or whatever, my doom listening. And we go out and do that first thing in the morning. And then I really, really try to hit the hard work of writing, which is composing or deeply revising what I've written or something like that. And I would say I do it 5, sometimes 7 days a week. Not all day, but for a good chunk of the day. And I love doing it, but like I mentioned, sometimes, it's got its frustrations.
Yeah. If you have a frustration, do you just kind of walk away, or do you make yourself sit there and try and, produce some sentences?
I'm glad you asked that. That's a really good question, because I think a lot of writers, and probably a lot of women, are hard on themselves, and they're going to stick to it until they get it right. And what I've found over the years is sometimes you do walk away. Sometimes you have to go out in the garden and pull weeds. Sometimes you've got to go, read a book, listen to music, call somebody on the phone. I try not to jump online and do my doom scrolling, but that's a distraction as well. But yeah, walking away, and especially actually physically walking, is an amazing meditation if you try to focus your mind on it. And you don't even have to focus it on the book, just, kind of step out of your own way mentally.
So once your book is released, are you already on to the next book? Do you allow any downtime at all? I mean, do you celebrate?
No. I wish that I did. I have so much downtime in my typical day in life because I work from home, my schedule is mine. And so I feel like I have daily balance. In my perfect world, I would probably take like a 6-week crazy vacation. But what happens is the next book is just nagging at me, just nagging. So I finished like the Lost and Found Bookshop. And indeed, what I was supposed to be doing this summer is touring with this book. I was supposed to be going all, I actually had somewhere, I had my book tour all planned out. It was going to start in the Bay Area where the book takes place. And I was going to go to independent bookshops all up the West Coast and end in Paulsbo, Washington at my friend Suzanne's Liberty Bay Books. And it was like happening in early March. We were just putting together the ideas. My publisher was, and I was, and then the decision got made that not happening, nothing's happening. Nobody can plan much of anything. And so thank you. I'm so grateful for you guys for having me, that I still get to, reach out to booksellers and readers in this way. It's not the same. So that would be downtime for me because it's time away. But what happens to me, and probably to a lot of writers, is the next idea keeps like knocking on my door and pick me. So if you're reading,
what are you currently working on? Can you share anything of what you're working on next?
I can. Yeah, I'm on the home stretch for a book. I can talk about it now because while I'm making it up, I try not to talk it to death. I just try to stay in the cupboard with it. But no, I'm just finishing a book that, as of yesterday, the title got changed. Surprise, surprise. Oh. It was called American Princess, and it was about a Washington, D.C. insider, white privileged wife with facing the empty nest, who has a very horrible occurrence at the very beginning of her book and realizes that she needs to make some major changes in her life. And so the title applied not just to her, but to her daughter and to this immigrant woman that is her friend, and some other things that happen in the book. And and she actually finds, for fans of the historical romances, she finds the old Calhoun papers and so you kind of get to revisit some of the old characters in there, and it's a bit of a historical mystery, and there's an American princess in that. So I thought, what a great title, right? And I sent it in to my publisher, and the after much meetings and much discussion, they decided that it needed a different title, which was okay. I mean, I really did like that title, but it has been used. It wasn't like a virgin title, because you've probably noticed as a bookseller that you can, titles can get reused. You
Absolutely.
can't write a title. It's just a weird, quirky thing. So I could call it Gone with the Wind if I wanted, and not, I legally could, I wouldn't. I'd be an idiot to do that. So, so the next one is going to be called A Brief History of Happiness.
Oh.
And they're just now designing the cover. What do you see for the cover art? And I'll ask the people who are participating in the chat. What if the title of the book is A Brief History of Happiness, and it's about a 44-year-old woman in the middle of her life who has an awakening, and a historical mystery to solve. What do you see on the cover of that?
Very intriguing. And
I know.
Will it be released next spring?
Probably in the summer, maybe a year from this one, from Bookshop. So, yeah.
Okay. So who are your go-to authors, and what are you reading this summer?
That kind of ties into Nicole's question that she asked in the sidebar. She said, are there books that you return to over and over again for solace? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And it can be anything from Diary of Anne Frank to Shayna by Kathleen Woodiwiss. Raise your hand if you've read Shayna, and everything in between, Eckhart Tolle's books. And so there are certain ones that sit on my shelf forever and sit with me forever. But this summer, oh my gosh, I've had such a reading summer. That's one of the very few perks of being in the middle of a pandemic, is we can't entertain ourselves any other way, except for, binge watching and reading. So let's see. This one, I love Adriana Trigiani. And this one in particular is really cool. It's called The Shoemaker's Wife. It's an Italian kind of family saga. Love that one. And then some really new stuff. This was just out this summer, The Sweeney Sisters by Leanne Dolan.
That one. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this one, she has a podcast, and the author in her real life has many sisters, like, I don't know, 4 or 6 or something, and they do a podcast together, and they're fantastic, and the book is really cool. There's a DNA test that reveals that there's another sister, so there's that one. I think I mentioned as we were getting ready for this that I'm trying to read outside my lane, because I've been paying attention to what's happening in our world and what's happening outside and pandemic. So I realized that I need to read outside my lane more. And so I picked up this one, recommended by a bookseller, Black Girls Must Die Exhausted by Jane Allen. And it's really touching and quite a page turner about a medical situation. Another bookseller in Colorado, recommended Sabrina and Karina, and it's a collection of stories. I'm not even going to try to say her name. I would just kill it. Kali. Yeah. Okay. That one. There's links to it you can find, and Read It Again Books will get you a copy if you want it. Can't recommend that highly enough. They're really amazing. And this one is a good one because each story is a story, a whole piece. So you can read it in little bits and pieces. Probably a lot of people read Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. But I actually thought this one was even better. I love Daisy Jones.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's going to make a kick-ass Netflix series or Amazon series, whichever service bought it. So read that. I have a henna artist in my family. My niece-in-law is a henna artist. And so I bought this for her, and she couldn't put it down. And it's so beautifully written. Henna Artist by Alka Joshi. And so that was just out. This is by a friend of mine, but I would probably read his books anyway. Eric Larson. He used to be a Seattle writer. He's since moved. He defected to New York. But The Splendid and the Vile is the story of Winston Churchill during the war. So that one is a typical Eric Larson. They're all good. He does this narrative nonfiction history like nobody else. And so I'm a big admirer of that. This one, my bookseller friend Suzanne and her son wrote it together. He also works at the bookstore. And this is a really incredible young adult fantasy. And I think it's the first of a series. And last but hardly least, I'm sure you sell a ton of Susan Elizabeth Phillips books. And this one is her latest, Dance With Me. So that's just my nightstand. Don't get me started. Don't even go to my e-reader because I've got a bad habit now, a good habit.
It's a good habit to have.
It is.
Yeah. My final question tonight, because I do love your series. I love Lakeshore Chronicles. I love Bella Vista. This I keep. Which one is it? That one I keep by my computer in my little den area. Just absolutely loved that book.
I love those books too. And the answer is yes and yes. Yes to more Lakeshore books and yes to more Bella Vista books. But that's the good news. The bad news is they're not on the schedule yet. I've still got to negotiate that with my publisher. It's probably too much information about publishing, but the publisher of those books, those series books, was acquired by HarperCollins, and so they're still, technically my publisher, but I'm with a new imprint, William Morrow Books, which is not anything that readers need to bother with, but it's a different organization and a different editorial structure, and so I've had to work with different teams there. But I have to say, my editor, the incredible Rachel, is a fan of those, and she noticed immediately in the Lost and Found Bookshop when I had a walk-on cameo appearance of Tess from the Apple Orchard. They had some historical artifacts they needed to show somebody, and I thought, well, they should, Tess from that book should be our expert. And so I did manage to do a couple little, Rachel calls them Easter eggs, when you kind of tuck in a little shout out to readers who might recognize it from a previous book. So a couple Easter eggs in there, but I do want to tell at least a third story in that. And I've got a big story for the Lakeshore books. It's just a question of, when those are going to appear. But thank you. I love writing those books, and I can't wait to get back to it.
Yeah. Do you maybe further down the road, do you see yourself doing another like brand new series, or do you like to just stick with the standalones?
I love doing both. There are things to love about both. If it's a standalone, I don't have to remember anything, and I don't have to really. I don't have to stick to an established script or storyline that kind of boxes you in. But with the series books, it's like they're familiar. I don't have to repeat certain research things. And so there's pluses and minuses of both. And actually, for readers of the Lost and Found Bookshop, pay attention to the bakery across the street called Sugar. That's where she gets her baked goods that she sells in the bookstore. Because I'm baking up a story that probably will feature that in a starring role. And so stay tuned. I mean, it's just the kernel of an idea. And so sometimes I pre-plan a series. Like I knew when I wrote the very first Lakeshore book that it was going to be the first in a series. Mm-hmm. I didn't know how many, but I planned it that way on purpose. And then other times a book just seems to suggest, just like the bakery sugar. And I keep thinking, well, who owns that place and what's his story or her story? And so they kind of develop along different streams of inspiration, but I'm always inspired. I'm inspired by readers, by booksellers. Oh my God, booksellers have been like the midwives of the Lost and Found Bookshop, because one final comment, I'll try not to get verklempt when I say this, but my publisher produced an advanced reading copy. That's the paperback copy that you got. And they did a pretty big run, but they only sent them to key reviewers, but a big run to only independent booksellers. And they solicited comments. They said, read this book, tell us what you think. And what happened was they went out like in the beginning of March. And I had so many booksellers email me and say, this is the last book I grabbed when I went out the door, and we closed, and we didn't know how long we would close. And they were so heartfelt to say, thank you for writing a book about us that makes us important and shows our role. And so I was not expecting that. That was kind of overwhelming to me. So thank you, booksellers. Thank you, readers. Wear your mask. Don't touch your face.
Wash your hands often and for 20 seconds. Well, I so appreciate you taking the time and talking to us today. Please remember to pick up a copy of the Lost and Found Bookshop today. Please support all of the indie bookstores, the independent bookstores. It doesn't have to be Read It Again in Georgia, but we, of course, love it if you would.
If you're here, just buy from Read It Again. She's given me the most pleasurable hour of my day. So, yeah.
Thank you. And when you do start traveling, I'm speaking on Kim's behalf. We would love to host you. Even if you don't have a new book coming out, we can talk about all of your books. But we'd love to have you.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to visit with you today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And I'm looking forward to your next ones coming out.
Thank you. And over and out.
Thank you. Bye-bye.